And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you for taking this Saturday early evening drive here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So we're going to take a brief pause from our repeated and hopefully entertaining discussions on some of the all-time great horror films as I see them. Some of my picks, you probably were scratching your head like, what the fuck, man? But we're going to take a little pause, and we are going to talk a little baseball, because the Yankees tonight have the opportunity to go to their first World Series in 15 years. And it's crazy to think that they haven't actually been to the Fall Classic since the last year that they won the World Series, which is 2009. But, you know, baseball is tough. With all the layers of playoffs, it's much more difficult to get to a World Series than it used to be. And this year, the Yankees, I don't want to say they were fortunate, but by virtue of winning the division, they avoided the wild card round. They didn't have any, best out of three situations, or even in previous years, like knockout games. And they were able to get right to the division series by winning their division. And it was a relatively difficult series with Kansas City. And now in the championship series, they lost a horrendous game the other night. And it's the kind of game where in certain seasons you just get kneecapped and you never recover. But in this instance, they took a terrible blow, losing a game that they were 98.8% to win with 2 outs and no one on in the ninth inning and a 2-run lead, and they punted it. They lost it. The pitchers are just exhausted. Everybody's on fumes this time of year. They came back. They won a tough game last night, and now they have a 3-1 lead. And it's not over. Statistically speaking, the Guardians, that's Cleveland, used to be the Indians, but Cleveland is probably somewhere between 10 and 15% chance to win the series. They have to win 3 straight games. The Yankees have to win 1 of the next 3 games. And so you do the math, and if there are 2 games left and each game is 50-50, then you'd say that one team has a 25% chance to win. So based off of that, maybe Cleveland has a 15% chance, somewhere in the ballpark of 12.5% to 17.5%, if you want to get technical. Again, my dad was a CPA. My brain works like this. But as a lifelong diehard Yankee fan, I don't really watch the games anymore the way that I used to. I follow, but I have to tell you that when fans, and the other night especially, and even last night from a lighter-hearted perspective, because the team ended up winning the game, playoff baseball, even as a fan, or perhaps especially as a fan, it is brutal. The games are not fun. They are not fun. They are torture. And my old man, God bless him, may he rest in peace, he started watching playoff baseball when he was 9 in 1951. And even as a kid, he said the games were torture. They're just not fun. It's great when it's over and you get a win, and it's great if you win a World Series, but just watching the games, they are not enjoyable. And in the Yankees' entire run that I've been, sort of a cognizant big fan, going back to 1995 in that incredible series they played, one of the 10 best playoff series in the history of the major leagues. Certainly it's in the top 3 of best 5-game series, best out of 5, when the Yankees played the Mariners. When you start talking about worst individual game losses, Game 5 of the 1995 division series is one of the worst single game losses in Yankees history, because it was a loss that ended the season. They had a lead in extra innings of the elimination game. They had a 1-run lead and they gave up 2 runs and lost. That was horrendous. Now, statistically, the loss the other night was worse, but they still had a 2-1 lead in the series. They were still favored to win the series. And when they announced the pitching matchups for Game 4, and this is a thing with baseball, it's unlike any other sport. Yes, there is some truth to the idea of momentum. It does happen. But momentum often comes down to who is the next day's starting pitcher. And the Yankees had the advantage, at least in theory, with Luis Gil, who had a terrific season. He wasn't really stretched out. He hadn't pitched in 3.5 weeks. And the Indians pitcher, I think, was Williams, He really hadn't had a very good season, and he also hadn't pitched in a while. And the Yanks came out, 2-run homer in the first inning. They scored 3 runs early, and it's like the disaster of the previous night didn't make any difference. But as a fan, going back to the 90s, and the first time the Yankees won the World Series in 96, this is playoff baseball. You don't get that many easy games where you go from, let's say, the 3rd inning forward and the outcome is never in doubt. You don't have to sweat. You don't see Joe Torre in a dugout looking like he's dying in 1996. Almost all of these games are going to be gut wrenchers, and you're going to be in series where you think you're not going to win the series. And I will go all the way back to the first round in 1996, me being 22 years old, and Dad and I had gone to a number of games that season. We had been to a regular season game, which they ended up losing about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks prior, September 22nd, I believe it was, of 96. I'm not 100% on the date, but it was in that ballpark. And the Yankees, in a best out of 5, they went out in game 1 and got beat. They lost game 1 of a best of 5 at home to a pretty good Texas Rangers team. The Rangers weren't great, but they were pretty good. But here's the kicker. That Yankee team, the 1996 Yankees, as much as it's a historically important season, it's one of the great fan seasons in the history of the franchise, that was not a great Yankees team. They were good. They won 92 games, but they almost coughed up a 13-game lead. They nearly punted away a 13-game lead into August and September, and they barely held on. They barely held on for dear life and ended up winning the division. So when I say the Rangers weren't great, neither were the Yankees. So the Yanks went out there, and David Cone was the ace of the staff that year, and he got hit hard in game 1. And we lost to a pitcher that I like as a pitcher, John Burkett. He was one of those kind of touch pitchers, like a Bob Tewksbury or a John Lieber a little bit later, who pitched so well for the Yankees in the mid-2000s. And the Yanks lost game 1 of the 96 ALDS. Now think about this. You have a little bit of leeway. At least you're not in an elimination game in game 2, right? So the Yankees go out in game 2, and they are trailing by 3 runs in the 6th inning at home. Now, you want to talk about a pressure cooker? You have this magical season. You win your division. You haven't won a World Series at that point in 18 years. And you go out there, you lose the first game pretty much going away. Juan Gonzalez was fucking monster back then. What an incredible player he was. And then you're down 3 runs in game 2. The Yankees rallied. Cecil Fielder had a couple of big moments. Graham Lloyd came in and pitched great in relief. And then Dean Palmer, who was like an 8-time Gold Glover, threw away a bunt, and the Yankees took game 2. And it was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. Meantime, you say, wait, we're going to Texas. We could just lose the series in 4 and not even come back to Yankee Stadium. So in game 3, Texas pitcher Darren Oliver, who had a really good career, I mean, he was still active not that long ago, it seems. Darren Oliver carried a lead through 8 innings of game 3 of the American League Division Series. And the Yankees went to the 9th inning, 3 outs to go, down a run. They were about to go down 2-1 and have to win 2 straight games or their season was over. Again, the pressure cooker, the entire game 2 was high stress. It was fucking torture. It was 3 hours of torture because we had lost the first game. And game 3, watching Darren Oliver handcuff them, the big hitters, whether it was O'Neill, whether it was Tino Martinez, whether it was Cecil Fielder, they just couldn't get anything done against this guy. And then, as history tells us, I don't want to say as luck would have it, the Yankees had a huge rally in the 9th inning off Mike Henneman. Really had been a very good closer, but by this point in time, he really wasn't really a closer. He should have been more like a setup man. But the Yankees got to the bullpen. They took game 3. And then game 4, Bernie Williams, I believe, switch hit homers from both sides of the plate. And the Yankees kind of won game 4 in more or less a blowout. But that's the first round. That's the first playoff series. And the first 3 games were like death-defying, high-wire acts. They were not fun. We were not enjoying anything. Now, if we had been at the ballpark, we would have had fun in the first game for the first few innings until they fell behind. But that's playoff baseball. That's what it is. And for young fans who haven't experienced this level, because the Yanks haven't even been to the championship series until I shouldn't say that. They were in the championship series in 2019, and they were in the championship series, I believe, they went there in 2022 against the Astros, right? They got swept. So they have been there, but they haven't been in this position, a 3-1 lead in a championship series. I'm trying to remember. I think the last time they were up 3-1 in the LCS would have been, well, unfortunately, it was when they were up 3-0 20 years ago against the Red Sox in that horrendous. Now, again, that series was awful. That was the worst from an overall perspective, from a historical perspective. The loss to the Red Sox in 2004 was the absolute worst thing because it heralded the Red Sox's prominence. They ended up winning the World Series that year and more World Series 2007. They had another one after that. It's like everything changed in that one series. And all of those games were horrendous. They were all bad. They were all painful. And there wasn't anything good. There wasn't anything enjoyable. 2003, where the Yankees got an Aaron Boone in the 12th inning or 13th inning or whatever it was, and Mariano Rivera just given everything he had in relief, throwing 3 scoreless innings. There was nothing enjoyable about that series. When the games were over, that was a good thing. Whether you won or lost, at least the game is over. It was 9 innings of high stress, incredible pressure. Anyone who says watching a baseball game is fun when you're this level of fan, they're full of shit. Or they're not the kind of fan that I was back then. And even now, you go on the message boards, you got thousands of Yankee fans after the game last night, which we won, saying some variation of, this game took at least 2 decades off my life. This game nearly gave me a heart attack. I thought I was going to stroke out when Noel hit that ball. And again, even if fucking cameramen screw it around, I didn't understand it because I wasn't watching at that time. Noel hit a ball that looked like it was going to be a 3-run homer, and the camera followed the flight of the ball. And Yankee fans were going berserk. And then the left fielder, Verdugo, settled under it and caught it. I mean, that is hilarious. I would have been dying, just like everybody else, if I had seen it. But when you go through the history of this, and I have a pretty good memory, as you all know, there are so few easy games. When the Yankees had the incredible run of 4 World Series in 5 years, winning the World Series in 1996, 1998, 1999, and 2000. If you ask me off the top of my head, were there any easy World Series games? Yes, there was one. One and only one easy World Series game. Because in 1996, when the Yanks beat the Braves, they lost the first 2 at Yankee Stadium. I'm going to get to the easy game. Just give me a sec. They lost the first 2 games at Yankee Stadium. The first World Series games at the stadium in 15 freaking years. And they got blown out of the box. Andrew Jones hit 2 home runs in the first game. Andy Pettitte got rocked. And then they got beat. It was somewhat competitive. They got beat in game 2. Jimmy Key didn't have it. And Greg Maddux was Greg Maddux. And then the Yankees went to Atlanta, and they won 3 white knucklers. They were very fortunate to win Game 3 against Tom Glavine. They got a couple of hits, and the bullpen kind of froze Atlanta. And then Bernie Williams hit a big home run, a 2-runner late to kind of put the game out of the reach. And then Game 4 was the game they were down 6-0. And they tied it on a home run by Jim Leyritz, where Mark Wallace just threw him a high slider. I don't know what the hell he was doing. Guy was out there throwing 100 miles an hour, throwing high sliders. And the Yankees ended up winning that game in extras. That was unbelievable. And then Game 5 was the epic pitchers duel, Andy Pettitte versus John Smoltz. And if anything, Smoltz was better than Pettitte that night. Marquise Grissom and the Braves outfield was Jermaine Dye. They messed up a play in the outfield, and the Yankees got a run, and they ended up winning a 1-0 game. Game 5 of the World Series, you win a 1-0 white knuckler winning runs on base game. And then Game 6 went down to the wire. The Braves had the tying run at third and the winning run on base when the game ended. All 4 Yankee wins were strangulation level games. Now, you move ahead to 1998, and this is the year with the one easy win in the entire time of the Yankees winning World Series where I was a big fan. 96, 98, 99, 2000, and 2009. So the Yankees took game 1 of the World Series. That was another excruciating game where the Yankees looked like they had it control early. They hit Kevin Brown. Ricky Leday had a big moment. And then the Padres really hit David Wells hard. And David Wells was a great pressure pitcher. He was almost a borderline Hall of Famer, but he just didn't have it that night. He gave up a couple of long balls, Greg Vaughn and Tony Gwynn. And the Yankees were actually losing by 3 runs to a just okay, not great San Diego Padres team. But they had Kevin Brown, who also was a borderline Hall of Famer, sad to say, because he sucked with the Yankees. But he was right in the middle of his prime. The guy was throwing 98-mile-an-hour sinkers. He was throwing seeds up there. And then the Yankees, down 3 runs in the 7th inning, Chuck Knobloch, who everybody disliked because he couldn't play second base for some reason. He was throwing the ball into the stands. It was just really bad. He had what they call the yips. Knobloch tied the game with a 3-run homer, and then Tino Martinez, after almost everybody in the building thought that he struck out against Mark Langston, hit a grand slammer. So that game was 3.5 hours of torture. The only easy World Series game that I ever remember was Game 2 of the 1998 World Series, where the Yankees and Orlando Hernandez, a.k.a. El Duque, survived a first inning where somebody nearly hit a 3-run homer, but O'Neill kind of tracked it down by the wall. It was one of those where I think he jumped, but it wasn't going to be a homer. It was an okay catch, but it was not like, oh my God, what an incredible, we saved 3 runs. But the Yankees went out that night, and I think they won the game 9-1. And after it was over, somebody on WFAN said exactly what I'm going to say here. If you didn't know it was Game 2 of the World Series, this felt like the Yankees beating Tampa Bay 9-1 on April 18th. That is the only World Series game, that is just about the only championship series game that I can recall that was that kind of easy victory. You want to say Game 3 of the horrific 2004 Yankees-Red Sox? Well, that game ended up a blowout. But that was a competitive game for the first 5 or 6 innings, and then the Yankees just went berserk. They scored 17 runs. And they hit the hell out of the former Yankee Ramiro Mendoza. And the joke among Red Sox fans back then, like Bill Simmons, was he's still pitching for the Yankees. He's giving it up on purpose. That was hilarious. And then over the next 5 days, disaster. So you have to, as a fan, buckle up. You have to accept that there are going to be horrible, horrendous moments and times where you are going to lose games that you should win. But there are also going to be times where you win games that you should lose. And there is no such thing as October baseball without this level of fan pressure and an absolute cauldron of swirling emotions, good, bad, and ugly. There is no way around it. And every one of those years, and my dad, if he were still here, he would give you chapter and verse of 1978 and how the Yankees were in trouble even early in the Kansas City series when they lost Game 2, and then it looked like they were going to lose Game 3, and it was only a 5-game series that year, the ALCS. They didn't make it a 7-game series until 1985, which oddly enough, that was a big year for it because the Toronto Blue Jays had a 3-1 lead against the Kansas City Royals. The series would have been over. They won 3 out of the first 4. That's the end of a 5-game series. But then the Royals rallied and ended up winning that series. And then they won the World Series in a very disputed scenario where Don Denkinger fucking up just an incredible blown call at first base. The Cardinals were probably going to win that game and win the World Series. And then the Royals ended up winning Game 6, and they blew the Cardinals out of the building in Game 7. Playoff baseball is all about pressure, and it's all about certain people seeming to have the knack for coming through in big moments. And, Giancarlo Stanton, he's been with the Yankees 6.5 years. It's hard to believe. It's kind of like at a certain point in A-Rod's career, you realize, he's been with the Yankees longer than he was with Seattle. It's crazy. And in the case of Giancarlo Stanton, his first year with the Yankees was 2018. And we know that he's been injured an awful lot, and he's actually a great athlete, but he can't play the field anymore. And it's not that he quote unquote can't run, but if he runs full out, he's going to pull something. And sadly, you saw it with Ken Griffey Jr. later in his career, where they pretty much had to let Griffey jog around because if he ran full out to first base, there was too high of a percentage chance he was going to blow out his hamstring or strain something. And that's the thing with Giancarlo. But I am a believer in the metrics, but there are certain people who seem to have the capacity to raise their level of concentration. I don't know what it is. And this is something that they used to say about Reggie Jackson. The irony of his nickname, it's, top 10 greatest sports nicknames, Mr. October, is that it was originally a crack made by his somewhat frenemy. They love to hate one another, Thurman Munson. And Thurman Munson, when he first said Mr. October in reference to Reggie, he meant it as a crack. But what Thurman was implying, not that Reggie didn't try in the regular season, but Thurman felt that Reggie had a level of focus in the postseason, and he wanted him to have it all the time, and he felt he's just Mr. October. But what Reggie did in October, you look at his numbers, they're crazy, and Reggie ended up winning, what did he win, 5 World Series? That's insane. He won back-to-back-to-back, and a belly-to-belly-to-belly with the Oakland Athletics of 72, 3, and 4, and then he won back-to-back with the Yankees in 77 and 8, and he was not just there to pick up a ring and a World Series paycheck. He was a primary mover. Game 6 of 1977 was kind of an easy victory. Game 6 in 1978 was kind of an easy victory because once Catfish Hunter, you gave him a lead, the game was over. Catfish was just going to knock the bat out of your hands, throwing that stuff, that 90-mile-an-hour bat-breaking fastball that was going to tail in on righties. But this is playoff baseball. And I would say the least likely outcome tonight, especially because they're in Cleveland. There are those times where you have a home game and, the Yankees of the Joe Torre era would have times where they would kind of blow teams out late. The least likely outcome tonight is that the Yankees go out in Game 5, because I feel like Rodon, who has pitched, this guy's got great stuff. He's more likely to go deep in the game than the Cleveland starter. Just like last night, you had at least there was an idea that Luis Gil could go deeper, and he did, but only by 1 inning. But Rodon could theoretically give the Yankees 7 innings if he has his command. And we've seen this year, when he does have his command, he's really tough. Because the guy's popping a fastball 95 to 97, and he's got that wipeout slider, and he has a very, what they call a repeatable delivery. When he's in a groove, he is very tough. He doesn't walk that many people. He can break bats, and he's, sometimes he gets a little worked up and loses temper a little bit. David Wells was a guy who would wear his emotion on his sleeve, and if you made a bad play behind him, he'd start sulking on the mound, and it just drove Joe Torre nuts. But the least likely thing tonight is the Yankees winning a blowout. That is really the last thing that we're thinking of. Most likely, it will be a hair-raising type of game, one way or the other. It won't be a blowout in either direction, and we've seen, as I said, Game 4 of the 1996 World Series, it looked like a blowout. The Atlanta Braves had the best pitching in baseball. They had Steve Avery was out there. I think that he was the starter, and the Yanks got to him, and then they blasted the bullpen, including Wohlers, who was terrific. He was an all-star at that time. That should have been a blowout, but it wasn't. The first game of that series was a blowout. I think the final score was like 12-1 or something like that. But that is the exception and not the rule. Playoff baseball is pressurized sport. And the players feel it. If anything, the fans almost feel the pressure more than the players. And that's the thing that you have to understand. They're humans too. And I remember after the Yankees lost an awful series in 97, they got beat in the division series, a series they should have won. They were up 2-1, and they had to lead late in Game 4, and Sandy Alomar hit a home run off Mariano for one of the few times that Mariano didn't get it done, and the Yanks lost in extras, and then they lost a tough game the next night. But the reality of playoff baseball is it ain't fun. Now, maybe there are some masochist fans that enjoy. I just don't. And I would almost rather not suffer. Now, I love going to the games. I've been to a lot of playoff games, not in a while. There's a chance that I'll get to go to a World Series game this year. Keep the fingers crossed. I've got to get there. But it's easier for me to actually be in the ballpark than to sit in front of the TV for 3.5 hours and suffer. And if my dear old dad were here, he would say the same thing. We actually had a couple of playoff games that we didn't watch because we just couldn't take it. We just couldn't take it. We could not take the pressure. We'd play 2 games of Scrabble instead and then catch up. Okay, we're in the 8th inning. Let's watch it from here. That we could do. But that's just how I feel. And when you are such a big fan, you not only wear your emotions on your sleeve, but it's like not like you're a player, but you're living it, you're going through it like this is a real emotional, psychological, and every other UAL word experience. It's hard to describe. And especially because baseball is a sport that so many people find deadly dull because there's very little action. But playoff games are unbearably tense, often from the first pitch to the last. And there is no other sport you could say that about. And that's why for people who watch all of the major sports, if they are kind of like equal fans, they will say the pressure of baseball is unlike any other major sport, for better or worse. Good luck to my New York Yankees in Game 5 tonight, with an opportunity to go to their first World Series in 15 years. And I'll even throw in a good luck to the Mets tomorrow as they try to extend the series to a seventh and deciding game in Los Angeles. There is still the possibility of the first Subway Series since 2000. That's 24 years. And that was the first Subway Series in 44 years since 1956. This has been episode 331 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me at this baseball-themed, playoff pressure-themed episode. If you checked out this one on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, or the others on which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.